Dust danced in the afternoon sunlight through the dirty blinds. I sat in my chair, surrounded by boxes of papers and old photo albums I'd retrieved from the far corner of the pantry. It wasn't that I was suddenly nostalgic. It was just that I needed to check some papers before meeting with the financial advisor. At least that's how I explained it to myself. My 74 years felt like every bone in my body, especially when I bent down to pick up a heavy photo album with a worn leather cover. Cassidy always insisted on those damn albums. "For family history, Obadiah," she'd said in her quiet voice that had gotten quieter and quieter over time until it had gone completely silent 3 years ago. Family history. How ironic. What do they know about how a real family is made? I opened the album and cringed at the familiar smell of old paper and glue. The first photo was our wedding, 1971. Cassidy in a simple white dress that I thought was a waste of money, and me in a rented suit. I couldn't afford to buy suits back then, but I already knew that one day I would. I had a plan. "You weren't even smiling then," I muttered, looking at my frowning face next to Cassidy's glowing one. "Because it wasn't a holiday. It was an investment." I turned the page. Our first house is tiny with peeling paint and a drooping porch. Cassidy stands on the steps, already pregnant with Baxter, pressing her hand to her belly. Part of my elbow is visible in the background. I was obviously in a hurry to leave when she asked for the picture. "I was working," I said to the photo, as if justifying myself to my wife's ghost. Someone had to provide for the family. Not everyone could afford to stay home and iron their bellies. The album was filled with moments that Cassidy thought were important and I thought were meaningless. Baxter's first steps, his first day of school, graduation. I wasn't in most of the pictures. In the ones where I was present, my face expressed annoyance or boredom. I set the album aside and pulled a file folder out of the box. Old insurance policies, receipts, financial statements. That's where the real story of my life was. In the numbers, in the gradual growth of the wealth I was building bit by bit. While Cassidy was wasting time on pointless family rituals, I was building a foundation none of them ever appreciated. An envelope of childhood drawings fell out of the folder. I didn't remember saving such a thing. Cassidy must have put them here. Baxter's clumsy scribbles a house, a sun with rays like sticks, 3 figures signed Mom, me, and somewhere off to the side, Dad. "Even then you drew me separately," I hummed, crumpling the drawing and tossing it into the trash can next to the chair. I remembered one night when Baxter was about 6. He was pestering me with some toy, wanting to show me how it worked. I'd just gotten home from work. My head was pounding with numbers and talking to customers. "Give it up, Baxter," I yelled at him. "Adults have better things to do than play with your stupid toys." His face contorted, his eyes filled with tears. Cassidy ran over and hugged him and took him into the other room, giving me one of her silent, judgmental looks. "What?" I yelled after them. "I worked all day so he could have those damn toys. Someone has to teach him that there are more important things in life." Later, when Baxter was asleep, Cassidy came up to me in the kitchen. "He needs a father, Obadiah," she said. "Not just money." "Without money, there's no roof over his head and no food on the table," I cut him off. "What are you suggesting? That I should quit my job and play soldiers with him?" "We can find a balance," she began. "Balance?" I laughed in her face. Balance was invented by losers who are afraid to make a choice. In this world, either you're successful or you're happy. I chose the former. She left, quietly closing the door behind her. It was always like that. She never slammed doors, never yelled. Just got quieter and farther away. I picked up a family photo taken when Baxter was about 14. He was already looking at me with ill-concealed dislike. Teenage rebellion, I thought then. He'll grow out of it. He didn't. I remember telling him off for getting a C in math. "You think I work my ass off so you can bring home C's?" I yelled at him, waving his diary around. "There are no C's in this house. There's no one in this house. he snapped at me then. "Just you and your goddamn money." I hit him, for the only time in my life. Not hard, but in the face. Cassidy came between us, and Baxter. Baxter just stared at me with such cold contempt that I felt small. He was 15. 3 years later, he left home and never came back. I tossed the photograph back in the box and rose to pour myself a whiskey. My joints creaked protestingly. "Ungrateful puppy," I muttered, taking a sip of the scalding liquid. I'd given him everything, and he ran away when he was barely out of high school. I remembered how Cassidy had cried nights after he left, how I yelled at her for crying. "You spoiled him," I accused him. "You made him grow up to be a weakling who can't handle adversity." It was a lie, and I knew it. Cassidy was a good mother, patient, loving, attentive. She made up for my coldness with her warmth. And I just didn't know any different. My father taught me that a man must be tough, must provide for his family, and that all this tenderness is a woman's bliss. That's what he used to say before he went out for cigarettes and disappeared from our lives forever, leaving my mother with 3 children and debts. I swore to myself that I would never be like that, and I kept my word. Never abandoned my family, always provided for them with everything they needed. Isn't that enough? The glass in my hand was empty, and I filled it again. The whiskey helped keep from thinking that maybe I was wrong, that maybe Cassidy was right, that Baxter had reason to hate me. He's got his own family now. Vivian, his wife, always looked at me as dirt underfoot. Junior high school teacher, my ass. What does she know about real life? Nothing useful to teach the kids. And they're both raising my granddaughter Willow the same way. All this talk about feelings and self-expression and all that nonsense. I haven't seen Willow as much as I'd like. For the last year and a half, they've been limiting our communication in every way possible, all because of one incident that they made a big deal out of. I just pulled her out of school without warning. What's the big deal? She is my granddaughter, after all. I had some buddies visiting, old friends from work, and I wanted to show off how smart my granddaughter was. She read them a poem, and they all loved it. And then Vivian came running in like a fury, making a scene in front of everyone, yelling about kidnapping, about how they almost went to the police. "You can't take her without our permission," she shrieked as Willow huddled fearfully against her. "Do you have any idea what we went through when the school called us?" "I'm her grandfather," I cut her off. "I have every right to see her whenever I want." "No, you don't," interjected Baxter, who had come in after his wife. "You lost that right a long time ago, if you ever had it in the first place. They stopped bringing Willow after that. I tried to stop by, but they wouldn't let me pass the doorstep. I called, but the conversation was always short and cold. Recently, I tried to approach Willow on the school playground, but the teacher had intervened. Apparently, they'd had some sort of plan in case I showed up. The phone on the table next to my chair came to life, interrupting the flood of memories. I stared at it like a poisonous snake. Not many people had called me lately. "Yes?" I answered hoarsely, bringing the receiver to my ear. "It's Baxter." My son's voice sounded formal and cold. "You finally decided to invite me to my granddaughter's birthday party?" I grinned, trying to hide a note of hope. There was a pause during which I could hear his breathing. "No," he finally answered. "I'm calling to say the exact opposite. You're not invited to Willow's birthday party, and I want you to stop showing up at her school." I squeezed the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. "It's my granddaughter," I hissed. "You can't stop me from seeing her." "I can and I do." His voice grew even colder. "After what happened last time, Vivian and I decided you couldn't be trusted. You're unpredictable and selfish. You're only thinking about yourself, not Willow's well-being." "Bullshit!" I felt the blood rush to my face. "I've always had my family's best interests at heart. Always. I've worked my ass off to control us through money," he interrupted. "But it doesn't work anymore, Father. I have my own life, my own family. We don't need your money or your toxic presence." "Toxic?" I laughed, but it sounded more like a carcane. Did you pick up those fancy words from your wife? What's next? Are you going to talk about my negative energy? There's nothing more to talk about, Baxter said after a pause. I just wanted to clear the air. Stay away from my family, Father, or next time I'll seek a restraining order. You wouldn't dare, I hissed. I'm your father. You have to be a father, not just call yourself one, he replied tiredly. Goodbye. The phone buzzed. I sat there clutching the useless piece of plastic until I noticed that my hands were shaking. Anger, I told myself. Only from anger. Tossing the phone on the couch, I got up and walked over to the window. My second-floor window overlooked the dreary streets of provincial Lynchburg, a town I'd never been able to get out of, despite all my financial success. He wants a war? He'll get it. I still have trumps up my sleeve. Money. It's always been about money, and I'll use it to show him what it means to reject his father, what it means to deny me the right to see my own granddaughter. I walked back to the desk and pulled a bank statement from the stack of papers. My gaze stopped at the total. Not bad for an insurance appraiser from Lynchburg. Not bad at all. Baxter has no idea how much I really have. He thinks I'm just a pensioner living on state benefits and a pittance of savings. Well, he'll find out soon enough, and he'll regret his decision. I'll take care of it. I picked up the phone and dialed my financial advisor. Mr. Holt, it's Obadiah Pym. I need to see you. Tomorrow. Yes, it's urgent. It's about a large sum of money. And an educational fund. After hanging up, I refilled my glass again. It was getting dark outside. Another night in an empty house. But now I had a plan that would make Baxter regret his decision. After all, I always got what I wanted. Always. I parked my old Lincoln in front of a glass building with a sign that read, Holt & Associates, Financial Consulting. Without turning off the engine, I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. Wrinkled face with tight lips looked like a man who had just been stepped on his favorite corns. As a matter of fact, it had been. After I shut the car off, I sat there for a few more minutes, clutching the steering wheel. Baxter's call last night had kept me awake. I'd tossed and turned in bed all night, imagining that ungrateful puppy celebrating my granddaughter's birthday without me. He'd probably invited his precious Vivian's parents, that pompous couple who always looked down on me, even though they were just the owners of a small accounting firm. I don't care, I muttered as I got out of the car. Soon everyone would know who the real master of the situation was. Terrence Holt's office looked the same as usual, minimalist and expensive. My financial advisor had been managing my investments for 20 years, and I liked his reluctance to spend money on unnecessary luxuries. The young receptionist, new, I hadn't seen her before, smiled welcomingly. Mr. Pym? Mr. Holt is waiting for you. Right down the hall. I nodded, not dignifying her with an answer. I can't stand those girls with their fake smiles. I'm sure they think I'm just another old man who's here to discuss his miserable pension. Terrence stood up from the table as I entered. A thin man in an impeccable suit with a neatly trimmed gray beard, he always looked like a successful financier from an advertising brochure. Obadiah, good to see you. He shook my hand and pointed to a chair. It sounded urgent. What's wrong? I sank heavily into the chair, feeling the pain piercing my knee. Damn arthritis. I need to know the exact amount. The whole amount. I looked him straight in the eye. And I want to start an education fund. A big one. Terrence nodded slowly, showing no surprise. Over the years we'd worked together, he'd gotten used to my sudden decisions. Sure. First, let's check the state of your assets. He turned to the computer and clicked the keys for a few minutes. So, the investment portfolio is performing well. Your bet on technology companies has fully paid off. Real estate is going up in value too, especially that complex in Charlotte. I tapped my fingers impatiently on the armrest. Get to the point, Terrence. How much? He turned the monitor around so I could see the numbers. I leaned forward, squinting my eyes. $7,482,000, Terrence said, and that's not counting real estate. I leaned back in my chair, trying to hide my satisfaction. Even I hadn't expected the sum to be so impressive. Years of frugality, prudence, and good investments had paid off. And the real estate? I asked. About 10 million, Terrence replied. You are a rich man, Obadiah, much richer than most people in Lynchburg even suspect. I chuckled, remembering the look on Baxter's face the last time I'd complained about expensive medication and the inability to fix a leaky roof. He'd offered to help, condescendingly, like a handout. I declined, of course. I don't need his pittance. Now, about the education fund, I stepped forward. I want to set it up for my granddaughter. $2.5 million. Terrence's eyebrows rose slightly, the only sign of surprise he allowed himself. That's quite generous, he said. Willow will be able to get an education at any university in the world, several advanced degrees even. Exactly, I nodded. But there are conditions. I want the money out of her parents' reach. Not at all. No loopholes. Willow won't be able to access the fund until she's 18, and only for educational purposes. Terrence started typing something. It can be arranged. We'll set up an irrevocable trust with you as trustee until she comes of age. After 18, the management would pass to her, but with restrictions on the use of the funds. No, I interrupted him. Not me. I want an independent financial manager to be the trustee, someone Baxter can't influence. I see. Terrence rubbed his chin thoughtfully. I can recommend a trust company. It would cost extra money, but it would guarantee independence of management. Money's no problem, I said. While Terrence worked on the paperwork, I stared out the window at the city street. I remembered how, after Cassidy's death, Baxter had come to help with the funeral. For 3 days he stayed at our, now my, house. 3 days of tense silence, punctuated only by necessary phrases about the funeral home and the inheritance. On the last evening, as we sat in the kitchen after the wake, he suddenly spoke. You know, Father, he said, staring into his coffee cup, Mother always believed that deep down you were better than you looked, that there was something else underneath all that callousness. Your mother was a naive woman, I replied, pouring myself a whiskey. That was her only flaw. Baxter looked up at me, and I saw tiredness in his eyes, not anger as usual, a deep, endless weariness. I'd hoped her death would change something in you, he said quietly, that you'd finally realize that money wasn't everything, that you'd missed your chance to be a real father to me and a real husband to her. I laughed in his face. Teach me some more, mail clerk. What do you know about living on your measly paycheck? Your mother never needed anything. Not a day in her life did she worry about a roof over her head or her daily bread. And you say I wasn't a real husband to her? Baxter stood up from the table, his face pale. You really don't understand anything, he said. You never will. The next morning he left. We didn't speak for almost a year after that. And then Willow was born. I found out by accident from talking to a neighbor who was friends with one of Vivian's co-workers. They didn't see fit to inform me that I had a granddaughter. I remember standing in a toy store, looking at the rows of dolls and stuffed animals. The saleswoman, seeing my confusion, came over to ask how she could help. My granddaughter is 6 months old, I said. What would be good for her? I ended up buying a huge teddy bear that cost a fortune. I drove to Baxter's house unannounced, rang the doorbell. Vivian opened the door with a baby in her arms. Her eyes widened in surprise. What are you doing here? She asked, instinctively pulling the baby closer to her. I came to meet my granddaughter, I replied, holding out the bear. And I brought her a present. Vivian looked at the bear, then at me. Her gaze was wary. Baxter isn't home, she said. I didn't come to see him. After an awkward pause, she stepped back, allowing me to enter. The house was small but cozy. Kids' things everywhere, pictures on the walls. Lots of pictures of Vivian's parents with the baby, none of mine. She let me hold Willow. I sat on the couch, clumsily supporting this tiny bundle, and felt a strange tightness in my chest. She had Cassidy's blue eyes. "She looks like my wife," I said. "Your late wife," Vivian corrected quietly but firmly. "The Grandma Willow she would never know." When Baxter returned and saw me in his living room with my daughter in my arms, his face expressed first shock, then anger. "What the hell are you doing here?" he asked, taking the baby from me and handing her to Vivian. "I came to meet my granddaughter," I repeated. "You didn't see fit to tell me she was born." "I had my reasons," he said. "I brought her a present." I nodded at the bear, which was almost the size of a couch cushion. Baxter looked at the toy. "She's too small for one of those. It's not safe." "She'll grow up," I objected. There was an awkward pause. "Why did you really come, Father?" Baxter finally asked. "It's not about Willow. You've never been interested in children." I felt a familiar wave of anger rising inside. It was always the same. No matter what I did, no matter what I accomplished, it wasn't enough for him. "I came because she's my blood," I said, "and I want to be a part of her life." "After failing miserably as a father, you suddenly decide to become a grandfather?" Baxter grinned bitterly. "I was a good father," my voice rose. "I provided you with everything you needed. Except love and support," Baxter added. "You know what, Father? If you want to be a part of Willow's life, you're going to have to play by our rules. No yelling, no trying to control us, no unsolicited parenting advice." I gritted my teeth but nodded. At that moment, I was willing to agree to any terms just to have access to my granddaughter, not because of my suddenly awakened grandfatherly feelings, no. I saw her as an opportunity to show Baxter that I was right, that my way was better, that I could have the love and devotion of his daughter while he never gave me either. "Obadiah?" Terrence's voice brought me back to the present. "Here's the tentative plan. We'll need a few more meetings to settle the details, but the framework is ready." I took the papers handed to me, ran my eyes over the first page. Everything looked right. Irrevocable educational trust in the name of Willow Pym, independently administered, access to funds from age 18, strictly for educational purposes. $2.5 million. "That looks good," I said. "But I want to add one more thing. I want all my remaining assets to go to her too, after I die." Terrence raised his eyebrows in surprise. "All of it? What about Baxter?" "What about Baxter?" I shrugged. He'd made it clear that he didn't need me or my money. "Obadiah," Terrence spoke more softly, "I've known you for years. Are you sure you want to make this decision? Disinheriting your own son is a big step." I stood up abruptly, ignoring the pain in my joints. "I didn't ask for your opinion about my family situation," I cut him off. "I'm paying you for financial advice, not psychological counseling." Terrence raised his hands in a conciliatory gesture. "I'm sorry. You're right. It's none of my business. It's just that as a friend—" "We're not friends," I interrupted. "We're business partners. And I want you to draw up a will that will transfer all of my assets except for the education fund to Willow when I die. Baxter won't get a dime." Terrence nodded, his face once again professionally neutral. "Whatever you say. I'll get the paperwork ready." I sat back down, feeling my heart pounding with excitement and anger. I remembered trying to contact Willow through school a few months ago. I'd brought her a birthday present, an expensive electronic toy she'd been dreaming of. Baxter hadn't invited me to the party, so I decided to approach her after school. I waited at the school gate, clutching the brightly wrapped box in my hands. When the kids started to come out, I noticed Willow right away. She was walking, chatting with some girl. I waved at her and she noticed me. There was a flicker of uncertainty on her face, but she headed in my direction. "Hi, Grandpa," she said, stopping a few feet away from me. "Hi, baby girl." I held out a present to her. "Happy birthday. Sorry I'm late." She took the box, looking at the wrapping. "Thank you," she said quietly. "This is the toy you were talking about last time," I explained. "Remember?" She nodded but didn't smile. There was an awkward pause between us. "How's school going?" I asked. "Fine," she shrugged. "And math? You said you were having trouble with fractions." "I'm getting better. Dad's helping." I felt a prick of irritation at the mention of Baxter. "Your dad was never very good at math," I said. "If you want, I can help. I'm good with numbers." She shrugged again, shifting from foot to foot. I could tell she was uncomfortable. "I should probably go," she said. "Mom's waiting." "Sure," I nodded. "But first." I pulled an envelope out of my pocket. "Here, take it. It's for your pocket money. Don't tell your parents, it'll be our little secret." She hesitantly took the envelope, but at that moment a woman I recognized as Willow's teacher came up to us. "Hello," she said with a strained smile. "You must be Mr. Pym? Willow's grandfather?" "Yes." I straightened up, sensing something was wrong. "Willow, honey," she turned to my granddaughter, "your mom is waiting for you at the front entrance. Why don't you go see her?" Willow nodded with obvious relief and quickly said goodbye and ran off, carrying the gift and envelope. "Mr. Pym," the teacher looked at me without a smile. "I must inform you that we have strict instructions from Willow's parents. You are not on the list of people who are allowed to interact with her on school grounds without her parents present." I felt the blood rush to my face. "What the hell is this? I'm her grandfather." "I understand, but these are the rules," she remained adamant. "If you want to see your granddaughter, you'll have to make arrangements with her parents. Now I'm going to have to ask you to leave the school grounds." I left, seething with rage and humiliation. That incident was the last straw. After that, I stopped trying to mend relations and started thinking about revenge. Here is the preliminary agreement on the creation of the Educational Foundation. Terrence handed me a new stack of papers. "And here's the outline for the will. Look them over carefully at home, and then we'll meet to discuss the details and sign them." I took the papers and nodded. "There's one more thing," I said. "I want a letter attached to the foundation. It will be opened when Willow turns 18. "That can be arranged." Terrence nodded. "The letter will be kept in the trust company safe with the other documents." "Okay." I stood up, leaning on my cane. "I'll let you know when it's ready." On the way home, I pondered the contents of the letter. Oh, this was going to be a special message. I'll tell Willow what her father was really like. How he turned his back on his own father. How he robbed her of an inheritance that could have been so much more if he hadn't been so ungrateful. I will sow seeds of doubt and resentment that will sprout when she is old enough to understand. And then Baxter will know what it means to be rejected by his own child. Grinning at that thought, I turned into the driveway to my house. For the first time in a long time, I felt satisfied. A plan was beginning to take shape, and it was a good plan. A plan worthy of me. I sat in my Lincoln, parked across the street from St. Thomas Elementary School, and looked at the clock. It was 15 to 3. The bell was about to ring and the students would spill out into the courtyard where their parents would be waiting for them. I rolled down my window to hear better and lit a cigarette, ignoring the "no smoking" sign on the school fence. What the hell are they going to do to me? I'm not even on their property. The bell rang at 3 sharp, and a few minutes later the school doors swung open, letting out a stream of clamoring kids. I slid into the passenger seat and raised the binoculars to my eyes. It didn't take me long to find Willow in the crowd. Her brown hair in a ponytail and pink backpack were clearly visible even from my seat. She was walking, chatting animatedly with her friend, apparently telling some kind of story. Her hands were moving, mimicking something big. Even from this distance, it was evident that she was smiling. At the gate, Vivian was waiting for her as usual in her teacher's clothes. Simple blouse, skirt, practical shoes. Nothing fancy, but she always managed to look like she was doing everyone a favor by her presence. Willow spotted her mother and ran over to her, wrapping her arms around her waist. I felt a familiar irritation watching the scene. Vivian leaned over, listening to something her daughter was telling her, then took her hand and they headed towards the parking lot. I followed them with a glance through the binoculars. Vivian put Willow in the back seat of their used Ford, buckled her seatbelt, and got behind the wheel. I started the car, but I was in no hurry to start the car. I let them drive a decent distance before following them. This was the 5th sighting in the last 2 weeks, and I had gotten a good look at their routine. After school, Vivian usually drove Willow either home or to some extracurricular activity. Tuesdays were art, Thursdays were piano. Today was Wednesday, so home it was. I kept a few cars away, not getting too close. Not that Vivian looked in the rearview mirror much, but it was best to be reassured. My old Lincoln was conspicuous enough, and I didn't want her to suspect surveillance. They turned onto a quiet street with rows of small but well-kept houses. The sunny spring day made the neighborhood look even more like a picture from a glossy magazine. The green lawns, the flowering bushes, the children playing in the yards. A nauseating idyll. The kind of well-being that triggers my gag reflex. Baxter and Vivian's house was in the middle of the block, a small one-story house with a white picket fence and a flower bed in front of the porch. Nothing fancy, but kept in impeccable order. I drove by, watching Vivian and Willow enter the house, then turned around at the end of the street and parked far enough away so as not to attract attention, but so that I could see their house. Pulling a thermos of coffee from the glove compartment, I took a sip and lit another cigarette. Surveillance required patience, and patience had never been my strong suit. Nevertheless, right now I was willing to wait. The plan that had formed in my head after meeting Terrence required information. Accurate information about how my granddaughter lived, what she was interested in, how she spent her time. All of this was going to help me craft the perfect letter, a message that would hit the mark when the time came. An hour later, Baxter came out of the house. He must have returned from work while I was distracted by my thoughts. He was in his postal uniform, blue pants, light-colored shirt, a postal clerk. I still can't believe my son chose such a mediocre career. With his abilities and the education I gave him, he could have accomplished so much more. But no, he chose stability and a reasonable schedule to be close to family. Ugh. Baxter was doing something in the yard, fiddling with the lawnmower. Always loved tinkering with machinery, ever since he was a kid. I remember him taking apart and reassembling old radios I brought back from garage sales. It was the one thing we had in common, a love of how things worked. Only he wanted to fix them and I wanted to evaluate them. There was a knock on the car window and I flinched, spilling my coffee on my pants. Standing next to the car was an older woman, gray-haired but trim, wearing a tracksuit. She leaned against the open window, scrutinizing me intently. "Are you looking for something, mister?" she asked with suspicion in her voice. "This is the second day you've parked here and sat for hours. Shit, I'd been spotted. But I was prepared for this situation." "Yes, ma'am," I put on my most charming expression. "I'm afraid you've got me. I'm watching my son's house. You see, we're having a bit of a conflict, and I'm hesitant to approach directly." Her expression has softened, but her suspicion hasn't completely disappeared. "Are you Baxter Pym's father?" I nodded, trying to look embarrassed and a little sad. "Obadiah Pym, at your service. And you must be—" "Eleanor Finch," she introduced herself. "I live 2 houses down from here. You know, instead of sitting here like some kind of, observer, you could just ring the doorbell." I sighed, trying to look as dejected as possible. "If only it were that simple, Mrs. Finch. I'm afraid Baxter's made it clear he doesn't want to see me. Even forbade me to come to my granddaughter's birthday party." "Oh," she visibly softened. "How sad. Family quarrels are the most painful." "That's not a word," I shook my head. You know, I don't even know how my granddaughter is doing, whether she's growing up healthy, whether she's happy. Willow's the only joy in my old age. Mrs. Finch looked back at Baxter's house, then looked at me again. Would you like a cup of tea? She suggested it. I've just got some apple pie ready. We could talk. About your granddaughter. Bingo. I feigned relief and gratitude. That would be very nice of you, Mrs. Finch. 10 minutes later, I was sitting in Mrs. Finch's cozy kitchen, sipping tea and eating a surprisingly delicious apple pie. Eleanor, as she insisted on calling her, turned out to be a widow living alone in the house she had once shared with her husband. She was the kind of gregarious old lady who knows everything about everyone in the neighborhood, the perfect source of information. Willow's a wonderful girl, she said, pouring my tea. Very polite and smart for her age. Sometimes helps me with the garden when I look after her. You look after her? I stepped forward. Sometimes when Vivian's late at school and Baxter's at work. It's usually Mondays and Wednesdays from 4 to 6. I made a mental note, so Vivian should leave around 4 today, and Willow will be brought here. And what does she like to do? I asked, trying to make my interest seem natural. Oh, she loves to draw, Eleanor smiled. I have a collection of her drawings on the refrigerator, and she loves to read. She has a very good vocabulary for her age. I sometimes read stories to her, but often she reads to me. That's wonderful, I smiled, trying to look like a proud grandfather. What about school? How is she doing? As far as I know, great. Vivian said her teacher praises her a lot in math. Can you believe that at her age she's already solving problems for older kids? I nodded, memorizing that information. Being good at math is interesting. Baxter had always had trouble with numbers, but Cassidy was good at keeping track of our household budget. Maybe Willow inherited that from her, or me. What about friends? I asked. Does she have any close friends? Oh yes, Eleanor nodded. She's especially good friends with a girl named Penny. They often play together after school. Penny lives across the street, a very nice girl, though a little shy. The conversation continued, and with each passing minute I learned more and more about Willow's life. Eleanor seemed happy to talk. Perhaps being alone made her less cautious. She told me about the Baxter family's daily routine, that Willow had recently gotten the flu and missed a week of school, that she dreamed of having a dog but Vivian was against it because of her allergies. All the while, I portrayed a concerned, loving grandfather who is not allowed to see his granddaughter. I even brushed away an imaginary tear a couple times while talking about how much I miss Willow. Eleanor believed it. Of course she did. People are always willing to believe a story about an unjustly wronged old man. It played right into my hands. You know, she said when I was about to leave, maybe I could help. Put in a good word for you with Baxter or Vivian. Oh, that's very kind of you. I shook my head with a sad smile. But I'm afraid it would only complicate matters. Baxter's very stubborn, just like me. If he finds out I've been asking about them, no, it's better to leave it as it is. In time, maybe he'll soften up. In fact, the last thing I needed was for that good-hearted old woman to spoil my plan by alerting Baxter to my interest. I needed them to remain in the dark until I was ready to strike. As I said goodbye to Eleanor, I promised to stop by again sometime, just to chat. She seemed delighted at the prospect. Lonely people are so predictable in their craving for company. Back in the car, I glanced at the clock. It was almost 4. If Eleanor wasn't mistaken, Vivian was due to leave soon, leaving Willow in the care of her roommate. I decided to wait and watch, just to make sure the information was correct. Indeed, at 16:05, Vivian came out of Baxter's house, got into her car, and drove away. A few minutes later, I saw Baxter come out of the house holding Willow's hand, and they headed toward Eleanor's house. I ducked down so they wouldn't see me, watching through the gap between the steering wheel and the dashboard. Baxter knocked on Eleanor's door and she opened it, exchanged a few words with him, then leaned over to Willow and said something to her. The girl smiled and hugged her father goodbye. He kissed the top of her head, gave Eleanor another nod and left, obviously going back to work in the garden. I started the car and slowly pulled away. That was enough observations for today. I had new information and I needed to think about it. Besides, I didn't want to risk staying here too long. Eleanor might spot me from the window and start asking questions. On the way home, I reflected on what I'd learned. Willow was a smart, creative girl with a talent for math. She loved to draw and read, dreamed of having a dog, and was friends with a girl named Penny. This information could be useful to my plan. Over the next few days, I worked out a system. I switched cars, renting different models so as not to attract attention with the same car. I followed Baxter's family from different locations at different times of the day. I even started recording my observations in a notebook, routines, habits, appointments. I learned that on Tuesdays, Willow takes art lessons at the community center. Thursdays, she has piano lessons at a music school across town. On Fridays, the whole family usually has dinner at Marco's Pizza, and on weekends they often go out of town or go to the park. I started showing up at these places, always keeping my distance, always watching. I saw Willow laughing, playing with the other kids at the park. I saw her frowning in concentration, outputting scales on the piano through the window of the music school. Saw her munching on pizza, sitting between her parents in a cozy restaurant. And every time I looked at these scenes, I could feel the bitterness growing inside. They had created this little perfect world from which they excluded me. They lived their happy lives pretending I didn't exist. But soon they would find out. Soon they will realize that Obadiah Pima can't just be tossed aside like an unnecessary thing. I always come back, and I always get what I want. On one day of observation, I decided to take a chance and get closer. It was a Thursday. Willow was supposed to be at her piano lesson. I parked near the music school and walked inside, introducing myself as a grandfather who wanted to sign his granddaughter up for lessons. The administrator, a young woman with bright red hair, was very accommodating. While she told me about the programs and prices, I looked around, trying to find a class where Willow might be. Could I see how the classes were going? I asked, just to have an idea. Sure, the receptionist smiled. We have a classroom with a transparent door where we're having a private lesson right now. You can see it without disturbing the student. She led me down the hall to a door with a small window. Looking inside, I saw Willow sitting at the piano next to an elderly teacher. She was diligently strumming out a tune I didn't recognize. The teacher nodded to the beat, occasionally correcting the position of her hands. She's talented, I said, not taking my eyes off my granddaughter. Oh, you know this girl? The receptionist asked with slight surprise. I looked up, realizing I'd given myself away. No, it's just that, it's obvious she has a knack for it. I backed away from the door. Thanks for the tour. I'll think about lessons for my granddaughter. I hurried to leave, afraid that I might be recognized if Willow suddenly left the classroom. But this little episode had given me another piece of information. My granddaughter was indeed talented in music. The next day, I met with my attorney, Albert Crane, to discuss the details of the will and the education fund. Unlike Terrence, Crane didn't ask too many questions or try to give me advice on family matters. He was young, ambitious, and interested only in his fee, the perfect man for my plan. So, Mr. Pym, he said, reviewing the documents, you want to set up an irrevocable educational trust for your granddaughter, Willow Pym, in the amount of $2.5 million. Is that correct? Yes, I nodded, with access to the fund starting at age 18, strictly for educational purposes. And as for your will, he turned the page, you want your entire estate, except for the funds already in the education fund, to go to Willow Pym upon your death. At the same time, your son, Baxter Pym, gets nothing. Is that correct? That's correct, I said, stepping forward. And I want to make sure that this will can't be contested. No loopholes. Crane rubbed his chin. In such cases, there is a risk that a bypassed heir could contest the will on the grounds that the testator was incapacitated or coerced. To minimize this risk, I would recommend undergoing an independent psychiatric evaluation and attaching the report to the will. I frowned. The thought of some shrink going through my head was unpleasant. But if it's necessary for a guarantee— All right, I agreed reluctantly. Organize it. What else? A written explanation of your decision would be helpful. Not an emotional one, but a rational one. For example, that you've already provided for your son during his lifetime, or that he's financially independent and doesn't need an inheritance, while your granddaughter has yet to receive an education. I grinned. Crane was cunning. He was suggesting I create a document that would make me look good in court if it came to that. Reasonable. I'll prepare such an explanation. And, Crane continued, you mentioned a letter for your granddaughter to be opened on her 18th birthday. I would advise caution about its contents. If it contains clear attempts to turn her against her father, it could be used as evidence of malice in a will contest. I brushed it off. I know what I'm doing. The letter would be appropriate. Crane nodded without insisting. He was smart enough to understand boundaries. In that case, I will prepare all the necessary documents. We'll need another meeting to sign, preferably in the presence of a notary and witnesses. Organize everything as soon as possible, I said, standing up. I want to finish this case. As I left Crane's office, I felt a sense of satisfaction. The plan was taking shape. The details were falling into place. The education fund, the will, the letter, these were all pieces of the mosaic that was forming into a picture of perfect revenge. I sat at my desk in my office that evening, reviewing my notes on my observations of Willow. I began sketching out a plan for the letter she would receive on her 18th birthday. That letter would be my last word, my weapon against Baxter. I pondered each phrase for a long time, trying to find the words that would strike the most painful blow, the words that would make her question everything she knew about her family. The school lobby was noisy and crowded. Parents and children crowded around stands of children's artwork. Teachers in festive attire scurried between groups, explaining things and pointing out particularly successful exhibits. The Spring Art Fair was an annual event at St. Thomas Elementary School to which families of students were invited. I stood at the entrance leaning on my cane and looked around. My dark blue suit, which I wore for the first time in years, smelled of mothballs, but it still fit well, though it was a little loose at the waist. I even tied my tie and shined my old shoes. Today I wasn't just an observer, I was a participant. I'd learned about the fair from Eleanor Finch during one of our tea parties. Willow is so prepared, the old lady chirped. She's going to have a whole series of drawings in the second grade section. She's so hoping to be praised. The plan matured instantly. I decided to attend the event. Open, public, with lots of people around. A place where Baxter couldn't make a scene if he spotted me. A place where I could finally see my granddaughter up close, maybe even talk to her. Pushing through the crowd, I found the second grade section. Drawings of children were hung on walls and stands, each with the little artist's name. I moved slowly along the display looking for Willow's works. I finally found them, a series of 5 drawings collectively titled My World. The first one depicted a family, 3 figures holding hands. A tall man, a woman with long hair, and a little girl between them. The caption read, "My family, Mom, Dad, and me." I felt a prick of irritation, not a hint of grandfather. The second drawing showed a house with a garden, the third a school, the fourth some kind of lake with trees, and the fifth a dog. Under the last one it said, "The dog I dream of." They're wonderful, aren't they? I turned around and saw a young woman with a teacher's name tag. She was smiling as she looked at the drawings. Yes, very colorful, I replied, trying to sound like a normal visitor. Are you related to Willow? She asked, noticing my interest. Grandfather, I answered before I could think. Her smile faded a little, and I realized I'd made a mistake. Apparently, Baxter and Vivian had warned the school about me. Oh, she said, and there was a wary note in her voice. Mr. Pym? Yes, I straightened up, trying to look imposing. I'm here to see my granddaughter's artwork. I assume this is a public event? Of course, she smiled, strained. It's just, I have to inform the director of your presence, security protocol. Of course, I smiled as kindly as I could. I just want to admire my granddaughter's drawings. No problem. She nodded and quickly left, giving me another wary look. I went back to looking at the drawings, but out of the corner of my eye I saw the teacher say something to a man in a suit, probably the principal, and point in my direction. I had to act fast. I started moving along the exhibit, pretending to look at the other kids' work, but really looking for Willow. In a crowd like this, she had to be here somewhere with her parents, and I found her. She was standing near a booth of clay crafts holding Vivian's hand. She was wearing a blue dress with a white collar, her hair braided into two pigtails. Even from a distance, I could see her animated face as she told her mother something passionately. I started to make my way toward them, but halfway there I noticed the principal saying something to Vivian, pointing in my direction. She turned sharply, and our gazes met. Her face froze. Then she leaned over to Willow and said something to her. The girl nodded, and Vivian quickly led her away to the other end of the hall. Shit. I'd been spotted. But I wasn't going to give up so easily. I kept moving, trying not to lose sight of them. Vivian was looking around, obviously looking for someone, probably Baxter. I had almost caught up with them at the corridor exit when the principal blocked my way. Mr. Pym? He said firmly. I'm Dr. Lawrence, the headmaster. May I speak to you for a moment? I'm a little busy right now. I tried to get around him, but he stood in front of me again. I'm afraid I must insist, he said quietly but firmly. We've received explicit instructions from Willow's parents regarding you. I realize this is an open event, but we are obligated to follow the parents' instructions as to who may have contact with their child. I'm her grandfather, my voice rose, drawing the attention of several nearby parents. I have rights. Sir, please let's discuss this in my office. The principal pointed to a door at the end of the hallway. Without making too much noise. Noisy? I felt my anger rising in a hot wave inside me. I came to see my granddaughter's work. What's the big deal? Father. Baxter's voice came from behind me. I turned around and saw him, in a suit and tie, a look of cold fury on his face. Ah, there you are, I said with feigned joy. I was just looking for you. I wanted to congratulate Willow on her beautiful drawings. What are you doing here? He asked quietly, stepping closer. I made it clear that I didn't want you anywhere near my daughter. Your daughter? I raised an eyebrow mockingly. What about my granddaughter? I have rights, Baxter. Blood rights that you can't just revoke. The headmaster coughed. Gentlemen, perhaps we should continue this conversation in a more private setting. There's no need, Baxter cut him off. My father was just leaving. Don't tell me what to do, boy, I snapped. I'm not some loser to be bossed around. I have every right to be here and see my granddaughter. You lost that right when you took her out of school without permission. Baxter took a step toward me. When you scared her with your manipulations. When you tried to turn her against us. You gave her money in secret and told her not to tell anyone, he interrupted. You told her what a horrible son I was when she asked why we didn't see you often. You tried to do to her what you did to me, control through money and guilt. Several parents stopped listening to our conversation with interest. I didn't like it. I wasn't planning a public scene. Let's discuss this somewhere else, I said, trying to speak calmly. There's nothing to discuss, Baxter cut him off. I want you to leave, now, and stay away from my daughter. And if I refuse, I crossed my arms across my chest. What are you going to do, Baxter? Call the police? Claim that your old man is a dangerous criminal? If I have to, yes. His voice was icy. I'll do anything to protect my daughter, even if it means getting a restraining order against my own father. I laughed, though I was seething inside. A restraining order? On what grounds? I hadn't threatened anyone, hadn't stalked anyone. Baxter's face changed, something new in his eyes. Not anger, but something like bitter satisfaction. What about the fact that you've been watching our house for weeks? He said quietly. That you'd been asking neighbors for information about us, pretending to be a hurt old man? That you followed Willow to the music school? You think we didn't notice? I felt the floor go from under my feet. They knew. They knew about my observations the whole time. I don't know what you're talking about. I tried to deny it, but my voice sounded unconvincing even to myself. Eleanor Finch, Baxter said, and the name sounded like a sentence. She's a good friend of ours. After your first conversation, she called us right away, concerned that you were asking about our routine and about Willow being alone with her. Damn old woman. I underestimated her loyalty to the Baxter family. She just misunderstood. I tried to salvage the situation. I just wanted to see how my granddaughter was doing, since you've deprived me of seeing her directly. And the administrator of the music school? Baxter continued. Did she misunderstand too when you went there and tried to see Willow through the window in the classroom door? She called Vivian right away because we have an agreement. The school warns us if anyone other than parents show interest in Willow. Damn small town gossip and mutual favors. Look, Baxter, I changed tactics, trying to sound reasonable. I just wanted to be a part of Willow's life. If you hadn't pushed me away, I wouldn't have had to resort to these methods. Methods? His eyes narrowed. You call stalking a child methods? I wasn't stalking her. My voice rose again. I was watching her. There's a difference. Not for the law, Baxter cut off, and not for me as a father. The principal, who had been silently watching our altercation, intervened again. Gentlemen, I insist that you continue this conversation outside the school. You are disrupting the event. I apologize, Dr. Lawrence. Baxter nodded to the principal. My father was just leaving. I'm not going anywhere until I see Willow, I said stubbornly. In that case, the principal straightened, I'm going to have to ask security to escort you to the exit, Mr. Pym. Security? I laughed. Are you seriously going to kick an elderly man out of school like some kind of bully? If I have to, yes, the principal answered firmly. I saw two stout men in security uniforms heading toward us. The situation was getting out of hand. This was not part of my plan. All right. I raised my hands in feigned surrender. I'll leave. But this isn't over, Baxter. You can't keep me away from Willow forever. I turned to leave, but I couldn't resist one last punch. By the way, did you tell your wife about that incident in high school? I lowered my voice to a confidential whisper, but loud enough for Baxter to hear. The time you got caught with pot in your locker, how I saved your ass from expulsion by paying off the principal, or how you stole your neighbor's car for a joyride and crashed it. Once again, Daddy came to the rescue, paying for repairs to avoid the police. I'm sure Vivian would be thrilled to know what a model boy her husband was. Baxter's face paled with anger. You, he choked. You really think you can blackmail me with 30-year-old teenage mistakes? Mistakes that Vivian is well aware of because, unlike you, I don't hide anything from her? That took me by surprise. I was sure at least one of those skeletons in the closet would be painful for him. And you know what the funny thing is? Baxter continued with a bitter chuckle. You even twisted those stories in your favor. The weed in the locker was planted, Tim Donovan admitted later. And I took my neighbor's car because my mom asked me to drive her to the hospital when she had a seizure and you weren't home as usual. I smashed the bumper because I was in a hurry to save her life. I remembered that incident. Indeed, Cassidy had gone to the hospital that day. But I remembered it differently, that Baxter had just taken the car for a drive with his friends and made up the hospital story as an excuse. "You were always good at making excuses," I said, trying to save face. "Always making excuses. And you've always rewritten history to make yourself look like a hero," Baxter countered. "Even now you can't admit that you were a terrible father, that you manipulated and controlled Mom and me, that you never cared about us as people, only as property. I provided you with everything you needed." My voice rose again. "I worked like hell to make sure you had a roof over your head and food on the table. And I thought that gave you the right to treat us like garbage." Baxter shook his head. "You know, it took me a long time to figure out why you were suddenly so interested in Willow. You never liked kids. You didn't even love me, just used me as an extension of yourself, as a way to satisfy your ego." I opened my mouth to object, but he didn't give me a chance. "And then I realized," he continued, "it's all about control. You can't accept that I've broken free of your power, that I created my family, my life without your input, and now you're trying to use Willow to gain leverage again." His words hit the mark, and it made me even angrier. How dare he analyze me? How dare he make me out to be some kind of manipulator when everything I did was for their benefit? "You know nothing," I hissed. "You're an ungrateful puppy who's forgotten to whom he owes everything he has." "I owe it to myself," Baxter replied calmly, "and to Vivian, and to my friends who supported me as I tried to climb out of the pit of emotional abuse I'd grown up in. The only thing I owe you is realizing what kind of father I don't want to be to Willow. It was a low blow. I felt something break inside, the last vestiges of self-control." "You're going to regret those words," I said, lowering my voice to a menacing whisper. "You're going to regret it. I have ways to make you suffer that you don't even know about." "Threats?" Baxter shook his head. "Really, Father? Is this what it's come to?" "They're not threats," I smiled, feeling my lips stretch into an unnatural grimace. "It's a promise, and there's something else you don't know about." I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a small tape recorder. The same one I used to record our conversations, hoping to catch Baxter in some kind of compromising act. "You see this?" I waved the device in front of his face. "I'm recording all of our conversations, including the one where you threatened me with a restraining order for no reason. You know what that's going to look like in court? As an attempt to cut off an innocent grandfather from his only granddaughter." Baxter stared at the recorder with an expression I couldn't decipher. Then, to my surprise, he laughed. Not nervously, not out of fear, but with genuine surprise. "You were recording our conversations?" He shook his head. "Jesus, Father, do you really think you can blackmail me with my own words? Words in which I tell the truth about how you behaved? Words that any judge would take as a father's legitimate concern for his child's well-being?" He was right, and I knew it. There was nothing on the record that could hurt him. Just the truth about my behavior, which from the outside really didn't look good. "You know what?" Baxter said, holding out his hand. "Give me your tape recorder. Record something else." I instinctively jerked my hand away, hiding the device, but Baxter didn't try to take it away. Baxter Pym," he began loud and clear, "am officially declaring that if you, Obadiah Pym, ever come near my daughter Willow again, show up at her school, attempt to contact her or follow our family, I will immediately go to the police and the court for a restraining order. I have witnesses to your harassment, including Eleanor Finch and the music school administrator. I have evidence of your attempts to manipulate Willow through secret gifts and money, and if you think your notes will help you, you're wrong. They will only confirm that you were consciously and purposefully trying to find ways to control and manipulate." He spoke loudly, clearly, so that every word was recorded clearly. "So take your choice, Father," he finished. "Either you leave now and never try to come near my family again, or the next time we meet is in court." We stood looking at each other in complete silence, An empty space had formed around us. The other visitors were clearly avoiding the conflict zone. Even the director retreated a few steps, though the guards remained in place, ready to intervene. "Is that your last word?" I asked, feeling a wave of cold anger rising inside. "Yes," Baxter nodded. "My last word." I slowly put the recorder back in my pocket, straightened up, and looked my son straight in the eye. "Then here's mine," I said quietly. "You're going to regret this day, Baxter. You're going to regret it." With those words, I turned and walked toward the exit without looking back. I could feel Baxter's eyes on me, but I didn't turn around. Let him think he'd won. Let him rejoice in his little triumph. He doesn't know that the real battle is yet to come. He doesn't know about the money, the foundation, the will. He doesn't know that I've already planted a time bomb in the heart of his family, and when it explodes 11 years from now, his world will come crashing down. Stepping out of the school into the cool spring air, I inhaled deeply, trying to calm myself down. The plan hadn't gone as I had envisioned, but that didn't change the overall strategy. On the contrary, it only strengthened my resolve. I knew now that I wouldn't be able to see Willow until she was of age. Well, that meant my revenge would be even sweeter. 11 years Baxter would think he'd won. 11 years he would live in blissful ignorance of what I had in store for his precious daughter. I got in the car and started the engine. In the rearview mirror, I saw Baxter coming out of the school and looking around, checking to see if I had really left. I grinned and pressed on the gas, let him rejoice in his little victory. The real war was just beginning. On the living room table were neatly laid out papers, my weapon, my way of delivering the final blow to my ungrateful son. 3 weeks had passed since the humiliating incident at Willow's school, but the rage inside me was still simmering. Every morning I woke up with that feeling. It accompanied me all day and went to bed with me in the evening. I picked up the first document, the final version of the Educational Fund Agreement for Willow Pym. $2.5 million that would be available to her from the age of 18. I reread the paragraph with the conditions for accessing the funds, which I'd insisted be included in the last revision. The funds may be used exclusively to pay for education at a college or university located at least 500 miles from Lynchburg, Virginia, where the beneficiary's parents reside at the time the fund is established. That condition was my little addition. Crane warned that it could be challenged, but I insisted. I wanted Willow to get as far away from Baxter and Vivian as possible. I wanted her to realize that real opportunities awaited her away from their petty, provincial lives. The next document is my will. It stated in black and white that my entire estate, except for the funds already transferred to the education fund, would pass to Willow Pym upon my death, with access to the assets when she reached the age of 21. Baxter received nothing. Attached to the will was my written explanation for this decision, dry, rational, as Crane had advised. In it, I pointed out that Baxter had already received considerable support from me during her life, including a fully paid education and assistance in purchasing her first home. This was a lie. Baxter was paying for his own modest community college education and saving for a down payment on a house on his own. But it sounded plausible and reasonable to any judge who might be considering a potential lawsuit. I set those papers aside and picked up the last one, a sealed envelope labeled Willow Pym for her 18th birthday. Inside was my letter, the product of much thought and several drafts. I'd worked on it particularly carefully, weighing every word, every phrase. I did not reread it now. It was already imprinted in my memory. In it, I was telling my granddaughter the truth about her family, about how her father had turned his back on me because he was jealous of my success, about how he forbade me from seeing her, depriving her of a grandfather who could have given her so much more than love, opportunities, connections, financial support, about how I tried to mend the relationship but only encountered hostility and ingratitude. Of course I was careful. No direct accusations that could be used in court as evidence of malice. Only hints, half-truths, subtle manipulations that would make her question everything she knew about her family. At the end of the letter, I explained that I had set up an educational foundation for her and signed over my entire inheritance to her because I believed in her more than her father. I believe that you will be able to use these funds more wisely than your father would have done, I wrote. Perhaps now you understand why I decided to bypass him and give everything directly to you. It was the perfect poison, slow, subtle, but deadly to Willow's relationship with her parents. When she received that letter, along with the news of the millions waiting for her, the seeds of doubt I'd sown would inevitably sprout. I gathered all the documents and stacked them neatly in my briefcase. Today, I had an appointment with Crane to finalize and sign all the paperwork. After that, the mechanism would be set in motion, and nothing could stop it. Albert Crane's office looked exactly the same as it had last time, minimalist, functional, with a pretension to expensiveness that the cheapness of the materials gave away. The young lawyer rose from his desk as I entered and shook my hand with his cold palm. "Mr. Pym, good to see you," he said with a professional smile. "All the documents are ready to be signed. The notary and witnesses are already here." I nodded, looking at the two middle-aged women sitting in the corner of the office with blank faces. Professional witnesses who had seen hundreds of people like me, old men rewriting their wills in a fit of petty revenge. "Before we begin," Crane said, "I must ask you again. Are you sure of your decision, especially about your son?" "Absolutely sure," I said. "Let's not waste time." Crane nodded and spread out the papers on the table. "First, we need to sign the education fund agreement," he said. "Here, here, and here." I leaned over the table and signed in the designated places. With each signature, I could feel the satisfaction growing inside. It was almost a physical sensation, as if, with each stroke of the pen, I were driving an invisible nail into the coffin lid of Baxter's hopes. "Now the will." Crane slid another document toward me. "Please read it carefully before you sign it." I ran my eyes over the text, even though I knew it by heart. It was exactly the way I wanted it. Not a dime to Baxter, all to Willow, with strict conditions. That's right, I signed the will in front of the notary and witnesses. And finally, the letter. Crane took the sealed envelope I'd brought with me. It would be kept in the trust company safe with the other documents until Willow Pym's 18th birthday. I nodded, watching him place the envelope in a folder marked confidential. "Well, Mr. Pym," Crane folded his hands on the table. "Congratulations. It's all official now. The education fund is in place, and the money has been deposited into a special account. The will has been probated and will be executed upon your death. The letter will be delivered to Willow Pym on her 18th birthday." "Great," I allowed myself a thin smile. "And there's nothing Baxter can do to stop that?" "As long as you were alive, he could theoretically try to declare you incompetent and take control of your finances," Crane said. "But thanks to the independent psychiatric evaluation you've undergone, that's virtually impossible. And after you're dead," he shrugged, "he might try to contest the will, but the chances of success are extremely slim, given all the precautions we've taken." "Just what I wanted to hear." I stood up, leaning on my cane. "Thank you for your work, Mr. Crane." "Always happy to help." He walked me to the door. "And, Mr. Pym, I hope you find peace now that everything's settled." I looked at him with mild surprise. It was the first phrase in which something personal, almost sympathetic, came through. "Peace is not what I seek, Mr. Crane," I answered. "I'm looking for justice." As I left the office, I felt a strange lightness. The deed had been done. The plan had been set in motion. Now all that was left was to wait for it to bear fruit. I got into my car and looked at my watch. It was almost 3. Today was a special day, Willow's 7th birthday. A day I wasn't invited to, as Baxter had made clear to me in our last phone conversation, but I wasn't going to give up that easily. I started the car and headed in the direction of their house. Not to show up for the party, no, I'm not that stupid. Just to watch from afar, see the guests, maybe catch a glimpse of Willow, and savor the thought that they're all unaware of the bomb I just planted under their happy family life. I parked 2 blocks from the Baxters' house and pulled out my binoculars. From here I could see their backyard where, judging by the balloons and a stretch sign that read, "Happy Birthday, Willow," the party was taking place. I saw about a dozen kids running around the bouncy castle that Baxter had apparently rented for the party. Saw Vivian fussing around a table of treats. I saw an older couple, probably Vivian's parents, sitting in deck chairs watching the fun. And finally, I saw Willow, in a pink dress with a crown on her head, laughing as Baxter picked her up in his arms and spun her around. Even from a distance you could see how happy she was, how cloudless her childhood was. Enjoy it while you can, Baxter, I thought, looking at this idyllic picture. 11 years from now, things will change. When your precious daughter gets my letter and finds out about the money I left her, when she starts asking questions that you won't feel comfortable answering, when she realizes that you have robbed her of the opportunity to know the grandfather who left her a fortune. For a moment I imagined her reading my letter, how bewilderment is replaced by shock, then anger, how she goes to her parents with accusations, their perfect family harmony crumbling. It was a sweet fantasy, and I let myself enjoy it to the fullest as I watched the festivities through binoculars. They don't even realize I'm here, that I can see them, that I've already won this war even though they think they've triumphed. Suddenly, I noticed Baxter looking around with a wary expression on his face. He said something to Vivian, and she started looking around too. Had they somehow sensed my presence? I lowered the binoculars and slid lower in the seat so I couldn't be seen through the windshield. After a minute, I peered out cautiously and saw Baxter walking toward the backyard gate, peering into the neighborhood. My heart beat faster. If he saw me here, it would be another humiliation. One more piece of evidence in favor of the restraining order he'd threatened. I quickly started the car and drove away, not waiting for him to get to my observation post. Enough for today. I had already seen enough to feed my fantasy of future retribution. On the drive home, I felt a strange mixture of emotions: satisfaction at having a completed plan, bitterness at not being able to be a part of my granddaughter's life, and anticipation of pent-up revenge. This was not the life I had envisioned in my old age, but it was a life I had created with my own hands, like everything else. At home, the first thing I did was pour myself a whiskey and turn on the old record player. 40s jazz was the only music I really loved. Cassidy never understood my love of jazz. She preferred the sentimental ballads from the 60s that made my teeth chatter. I sat back in my chair, sipping my whiskey and looking out at the empty room. The silence, broken only by the music, pressed on my ears. Sometimes, in moments of rare honesty with myself, I recognized that loneliness was not the most pleasant companion in old age, but today it seemed almost comfortable. Today I was pleased with myself. I pulled out of my desk drawer the notebook in which I had kept a record of my observations of the Baxter family. Now that the plan was set in motion, those notes were no longer needed. I could have thrown them away, but something held me back. Maybe the sentimentality I so despised in others, or maybe the vague hope that they would still be useful someday. I flipped through the pages filled with my sharp, angular handwriting, Willow's schedule, her habits, her interests, the names of her friends, observations about how she interacts with her parents. All of these details that I had collected so carefully now seemed both important and meaningless at the same time. I closed the notebook and put it back in the drawer. Today I didn't want to think about the past, or even the future. Today I just wanted to enjoy the present, the feeling of a plan accomplished, the realization that I was still in control, despite Baxter's best efforts to shut me out. The whiskey was burning my throat pleasantly, the jazz providing the perfect backdrop for reflection. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes, imagining scenes of the future. Willow reading my letter, her shock and anger, Baxter trying to justify himself, the crack that would appear in their relationship and only widen over the years. It was a sweet fantasy, and I enjoyed it thoroughly. But even in this moment of triumph, somewhere deep inside, an uncomfortable thought was scrabbling. What if it didn't work? What if Willow turns out to be smart enough to see through my manipulations? What if the bond between her and her parents turned out to be stronger than I'd anticipated? I shoved the thought away like a pesky fly. Of course it would work. Money always changes things. I knew that better than anyone. Money can destroy even the strongest of family bonds, especially when it's mixed with doubt and reticence. The phone on the table next to my chair rang, interrupting my musings. I glanced at the caller ID, an unknown call, probably another telemarketer or a charity organization begging for donations. I ignored the call, letting the answering machine do its job. After the tone came a voice that made my heart skip a beat. "Grandpa? It's Willow. Yeah, I'm calling to say thank you for the gift. Mom said the box was from you, even though Dad didn't want to open it at first. It's the most beautiful music box I've ever seen, and it plays my favorite tune. How did you know that?" "Well, thank you. She was quiet, and I heard Vivian's muffled voice in the background. "And happy birthday to me," Willow finished with a laugh, and the connection went dead. I sat there, looking at the answering machine, and felt a strange feeling grow inside. Not anger, not irritation, not even satisfaction that my gift had gotten through despite Baxter's resistance. It was something else, something almost forgotten. I'd sent the music box a week ago, not particularly hoping it would be given to Willow. It was an expensive antique piece I'd found in a small junk store. It played Beethoven's To Elise, a tune I'd learned by chance from Eleanor that Willow had been learning in her piano lessons. I hadn't expected a thank you. I didn't expect Willow to even know who the gift was from. I was sure Baxter would rather throw the box away than admit it was from me, and I certainly didn't expect her to call. Her voice. It was so alive, so sincere. There was none of the fear or wariness I'd noticed when I'd tried to communicate with her before, only childlike joy and gratitude. For a moment, I felt a prick of doubt in my plan. What if I was wrong? What if my letter, my manipulations would bring nothing but pain to this child who was so genuinely excited about my gift? But I quickly suppressed that thought. No, the plan was the right one. Baxter deserved what was in store for him. He had taken away my opportunity to be a grandfather, and now he had to pay for it. And Willow, well, she'd get a good education thanks to my money. Maybe she'll even be grateful to me in the long run when she realizes the opportunities I've opened up for her. I stood up, walked over to the answering machine, and pressed the button to listen to the message again. Willow's voice filled the room, and I closed my eyes, visualizing her face, her smile. I wondered if she liked the gift as much as she'd shown, or had Vivian made her call out of courtesy. It didn't matter. What mattered was that my plan was set in motion and nothing could stop it. The letter was waiting, the money was safely invested, the will was probated. All that remained was to wait for all these seeds I had sown to sprout and bear their bitter fruit. I returned to my chair and poured myself another whiskey. Jazz continued to play, filling the emptiness of the room. I took a sip and allowed myself a smile. Let Baxter think he'd won. Let him enjoy his little victory, his happy family, his proper life. I'll still have the last word. As always.